Let's talk mold real quick. I've seen some expensive mistakes, as always, but I'm seeing a lot of crawl space stuff lately. So this was a house that had mold. Let me get to a better photo here. The insulation had all been pulled out because of a pest issue. Little rodents running around. And the home inspector found mold on the underside of the subfloor throughout. He called out for additional ventilation, which was going to cost $6,000. Now, we go out there at a very quick glance. We know that by seeing mold on the back side of the subfloor, the underside, behind the insulation, that tells us this mold is from the day the house was built. It hasn't grown since. It's not active. It's not due to any ventilation issue whatsoever. If the mold is behind the insulation, it's from when it was originally built. The humidity from even a missing vapor barrier, all that stuff, it'll cause mold on the exposed joist, but that's not going to go behind the insulation. So if your home inspector says, hey, I found mold in the crawl space, be very clear, is it behind the insulation? Is it just on the exposed part? That will determine what caused it in the first place.
Does it matter if the insulation has a vapor barrier on it or not, or if it's just naked on both sides?
Good question. In this case, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yep. That it won't get past it either way to cause that condensation. So I see a lot of times when it's found, but say the insulation hadn't been pulled out from a pest control issue, and then the recommendation is tear all the insulation out, treat it, put it back. If your client wants to, sure, but that's a big ticket item, right? You're looking at $1 a square foot to pull the insulation out, another $1 to put it back in, plus dealing with the mold. We want to be clear whether this is an ongoing issue or 20 years ago when the house was constructed and it got rain on that subfloor.
So,
yeah.
Can I extrapolate and say black mold is always only visible, and if I see it on a wall, it's not inside the wall, and just look for it on the outside and don't worry about it if I can't see it?
You know, you're right in 90% of cases. So in most cases we say, what you say is what you get. If you walk into a house and there's no mold growing on the sheetrock or walls, it's very rare that it's growing hidden inside of a wall cavity. Super rare. Maybe you've got some weird flashing failure. Very odd. The one exception to it is, well, here, let me show you this case. Okay, I'm going to show you two scenarios that will illustrate this point. Hopefully you're not showing a lot of houses that look like this to your clients. Nasty mold. The cause is pretty clear. There's no bath fan up there, right? So just humidity over the years, lack of cleanliness. We took a sample in this house, and then here's a completely different home. Basement storage area. No visible mold anywhere. No speckling, spotting, anything but a really strong musty odor. It hit you pretty intense when you walked into this room. This rug was damp to the touch. You've probably seen this in a garage, right? You know, you pull back a plastic bin and the concrete looks wet from, that's vapor trying to come up into it. Took a sample in both of these. 120 spores. Squeaky clean. That's cleaner than this office.
Yeah.
It is having no effect on the air quality whatsoever. It's old, it's dormant, it needs to be cleaned up, not a big deal. 340,000 spores. Anybody with the slightest asthma and allergies is going to feel miserable. Your clients would not buy this house.
Yeah.
And they would readily buy this one and say, oh, it's just got a musty odor, let's get the bath fan going in here, get the heat up, no big deal. This is under $1,000 to fix, at least $10,000, $15,000, and no guarantee, right? Vapor emissions are hard to fix. This carpet, that's all.
Couldn't you just get rid of the carpet?
Yeah, the remediation was literally rolling it up and throwing it out.
Isn't that an area rug?
Yep. So the cleanup is very cheap. Preventing this in the future, very expensive. If you just said, forget it, we're never going to carpet this or finish this basement out, fine, no big deal. The vapor just comes up into the air. Your fan deals with it. The second you put a carpet down on it, it slows down that vapor enough to cause huge mold issues. So the one area where I see heavy mold issues, but you don't see anything, is carpet on concrete. That's where you can have really elevated levels, but it's kind of in the fibers. Every time you walk across it, it sends them up into the air. Or if you've got high humidity, you walk into a house, there's condensation all over the windows. There's not really any visible mold. Those are the two cases where you can have really high levels, but it's kind of in the background fabrics and carpeting.
I've seen some bathrooms with poured, custom concrete shower pans, and maybe they aren't sealed or something. Does mold grow in porous concrete? Because it's continually getting wet because of the shower, or am I just misinterpreting?
You can get mold growing on concrete. Mold will grow basically on anything because it's going to grow on the dust that's settled on that surface. Like you've probably seen mold growing on an old glass or an old window, metal frame window, and it's even growing on the glass or the metal. Well, it can't eat either of those, right? But it's eating the layer of dust that's settled on it. So the same is true for concrete. Now, if it's sealed beneath a shower pan and you've gotten a little water, or say behind tile in a shower, and there's technically mold behind there, it's not affecting the air quality. It's not doing anything. Stop the leak, dry it out. You're good to go. There's no need to go tearing out tile or things like that because it's the tile or the concrete is basically acting like an encapsulant. It's sealing it in there. So, as another point, if you've got a home inspector that throws a moisture meter on a bathroom, like on a shower surround or floor, and finds water, don't let anybody go tearing out all that tile until you've really proven that there's an issue or it's totally delaminating, because usually you just fix the water issue and leave it be. It's already sealed up and encapsulated.
Because we do have a lot of basements and we live in a wet place and people do carpet their basements.
Yeah.
For padding underneath carpets, is there anything that you think is kind of like the foolproof thing or way better than like standard carpet padding?
Really, it's all about prep. So if you're, the problem is a lot of your clients buy this house in the summer, no big deal. Come fall, they fur it out, frame out the walls, insulate it, put carpet down, and then January there's that musty odor. A few months later, you come do a test and the spores are really high. So first note is do not let your clients finish out a basement until they've survived a winter here. I mean, you cannot buy a house and then go remodel it without a huge risk. Let it operate during the winter months. Before you put carpet down, take a plastic bag, tape it to the concrete surface. Come back a few days later, peel up the plastic, look on the back side. If you see water droplets and condensation, that means you've got this vapor emission issue coming up. You should not put carpet on that, right? We got to fix the issue first. Wait to do that until it's wet out, right? You can't do that in July and give yourself a clean bill of health. You got to make sure the ground is saturated, it's really wet. Like all the rains and flooding we had a week or so ago, that's a great time to see the worst case scenario for a basement. Put a piece of plastic down, see how it responds. If that doesn't work, then you're looking at downspouts, redirecting. If that doesn't work, then interior footing drain and a sump pump. The type of pad, there were some styles for a while that had like a waterproof padding, but then you just end up trapping the water between the pad and eventually you get a funky odor from that. So what I like to see is just completely dry. We're addressing the moisture before it gets to the pad in the first place. So none of it's a deal breaker. You can still totally buy these houses, but just your customers, I find they're much less angry about this if they've been coached and to budget for the amount of money in a worst case scenario. I mean, I see houses that were built last year that have basement flooding issues. So it's not, something that only strikes old home. If you buy a house that has anything below grade, it is ready to leak at any point, right? So if you're going to buy a house with a basement, budget for that footing drain, sump pump, dimple board, that sort of stuff, and should be good to go.